I'm going to start with a question that might feel uncomfortable and even a little destabilizing. What if the parent that you spent years defending, that parent that you tell yourself was the good one or the easier one, the parent that you protected in your own mind and probably in therapy, what if they didn't really protect you? What if the parent you spent your whole life defending and maybe even feeling sorry for was actually the one who failed you the most? Not the abusive one, not the chaotic one, the good one, the one who stayed, and maybe the one who meant well, but the one who didn't protect you. Hi, I'm Amy Rose White, and I'm an integrative psychotherapist. For over 2 decades, I've worked with adults unraveling childhood trauma. And today we're talking about something that almost no one names, but that quietly, honestly, really shapes all of our relationships, our boundaries, our sense of safety well into adulthood. And it's what I call the good parent wound. Today you're going to learn what it is, if it shows up in your life, and what to do about it. When we talk about childhood trauma, most of us are very familiar with concepts like the mother wound or the father wound. We spent years, sometimes decades, processing the injuries that we experienced at the hands of the parent who just had the most obvious problems. Maybe it was a parent with addiction to drugs or alcohol. Maybe it was a parent with untreated mental illness or just something obviously really unstable about them. The parent who was violent, cruel, unpredictable, or emotionally unavailable. We focus on that parent who was neglectful, punitive, or just simply not there. And in families where there were two caregivers, whether biological parents, adoptive parents, grandparents, or even an older sibling who stepped into that role, we tend to organize our story of our past in a very particular way. There was a bad one, and then there was a good one. I'm going to talk about why we do that later in the video. But there's one we put on a pedestal, the one who didn't hit us, the one who wasn't actively abusive, the one who seemed kinder, gentler, easier, the one we tell ourselves didn't hurt us, and maybe we even felt sorry for them. But what is very rarely talked about, and often what takes years of therapy and deep healing work to even begin to see, is the lingering emotional injury caused by that good parent, the one who didn't protect us. In my work as an integrative psychotherapist and in my own healing journey, this is something I see over and over again. At some point, after we've processed the more obvious trauma, which makes sense, we've got to start somewhere, something else starts to surface in us. And a quieter pain, or maybe like a grief we can't name, or a sense of betrayal starts to emerge. And what we come to realize is this: that good parent injured us in a very different way, not through direct harm, but through inaction, through a failure to set boundaries, through a failure to leave, through a failure to say, this is not okay and my child will not be treated this way. That parent may have stayed with the abusive partner, or they may have minimized what was happening, or just looked the other way, or just left us alone with them all the time. They may have needed us emotionally instead of protecting us. And that to me is really a form of betrayal trauma. Because when you're a child, obviously your survival depends on your caregivers. And we're wired to believe that someone is watching out for us. And when the parent who feels safest doesn't step in, something very deep fractures. But it's so hard to see it until later on. For many adult children, this dynamic doesn't even end in childhood. That good parent may still rely on you emotionally. They may expect you to manage their feelings. They may put you in the role of peacekeeper, smoothing things over, not being difficult, or making sure that their current partner is comfortable and happy and you don't rock the boat of that relationship. And what that does over and over again is rob you of ever fully getting to be the child, a child whose emotional and physical needs come first. And I want to say this very clearly. I believe that is a fair expectation. I have adult children. They're 20 and 22. And yes, our relationship has evolved. Yes, I respect their autonomy in adulthood and making their own choices. But at the core, they will always be my children. I would never ask them to take care of me emotionally. I would never ask them to sacrifice themselves for my comfort, unless I was very old, very ill, and had absolutely no other options. And of course, I want to acknowledge something important about that, which is this perspective I'm describing is absolutely culturally relative. It's very rooted in Western white, Anglo-Saxon Protestant norms. And in many cultures still today, interdependence between parents and adult children looks very different. And of course, that matters. But even within those cultural frameworks, there is still a deep human need, even in the adult child, to know that their parent fundamentally has their best interests at heart, that they are still, at least emotionally, in a protective role. And when that's missing, the pain is so deep. So, what happens in therapy, or I guess any other healing thing you're doing, often much later in life, is that we begin to see the good parent more clearly. And that process is hard because it requires us to grieve not just what happened, but what didn't happen. And it requires us to accept that the parent we idealized had limitations and is just a normal, flawed human being, and that they failed us in ways we weren't ready to see as children. And sometimes that parent is, again, still harming us by keeping us stuck in a role that no longer fits, by expecting emotional caretaking, by refusing to acknowledge our pain, by being unable or unwilling to hear how their choices impacted us. And that's where a lot of the real work begins. So, healing the good parent wound often involves working directly with anger. And to be clear, anger here is not about punishment or punishing them, it's about acknowledging the truth and owning that. And we can work with our anger through journaling, through letter writing to that parent, through chair work, where we speak to the parent as if they're here in an empty chair. Sometimes through very physical releases like breaking things in a safe way, moving the body, shaking, tension release exercises, basically letting the energy out. And sometimes through actual conversations, sharing with that parent what you're uncovering, naming the pain, naming that impact. And here's where things can go in very different directions, as you know. Sometimes the parent can hear it, they can tolerate it, they can listen, they might even take responsibility, and you could even get an apology, and that could be profoundly healing. Other times, they can't. They become defensive, they minimize, they shut down, and they might make it about themselves. Because the reality is, and this is not always the case, but I stand by this and it's a hard truth. A parent who stays with an actively abusive person or doesn't protect you even if they've left and expects you to handle it and deal with it in some way or puts you in harm's way often has as deep a mental illness or emotional immaturity or some kind of something that is very wrong, at bottom line extremely selfish, as the parent that we formerly believed hurt us the most. We always choose our reciprocal. And so when we decide to stay in a relationship where the children are being actively harmed, abused, and neglected, there is just unhealed, projected stuff in us that would even make that possible. So, in the end, the good parent we discover, especially if we try to confront them, they reveal themselves to actually be just as really damaged and damaging as the other parent that we have all these other memories about. So, in some cases, we come to realize that this good parent has actually caused more ongoing pain in our adult lives than the parent we labeled as abusive. Again, super hard to reconcile because of that loyalty and having put them on a pedestal and idealized them, because the part of us that still desperately wants at least one parent to be safe. And this brings me to the core healing tasks of healing the good parent wound. So, there are three primary ones. The first one is simply acknowledging and working through that cognitive dissonance. As children, we often engage in what we call splitting, which is why I'm using the words bad and good. We make one, the scarier parent or absent parent, bad, and the other good, into black and white thinking. Because the reality that one parent was abusive and the other didn't protect us is way too overwhelming for a child's nervous system. So we create a story that allows us to basically survive. And healing requires gently unraveling that story. The second task is grieving. Grieving what was and grieving what wasn't. Grieving the parent we needed but we didn't have. And the third task is deciding what we're going to do with that information now. This usually involves boundaries. So you might get more distance emotionally or physically, You might have to redefine how you interact in the relationship. Often it's continued engagement, but with much clearer limits. So eventually we arrive at acceptance, not approval or justification, of course, but an acceptance of who they are, an acceptance of what they can and cannot give now and then. In mental health and something called dialectical behavior therapy, we actually call this radical acceptance, which just means seeing reality clearly and choosing our response accordingly, not trying to bargain for it to be different. The gift of healing the good parent wound is this: we step out of that childlike need to divide and split the world into good and bad, and we gain a more accurate understanding of our reality. And from that place, we can develop deeper compassion for ourselves and for others. We become clearer about our needs and stronger in our boundaries. We become more honest in our relationships. And that clarity is worth the pain it takes to get there. Thank you so much for being here with me today, for liking, sharing, and hyping the video. If this resonated with you, explore my trauma healing content and this video here, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.